make it 2 in a row now for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They sweep this weekend back-to-back at a 4 out of 4 points. They take down the Columbus Blue Jackets 3-2 after taking down the New York Rangers 1-0 on Saturday. I have a full game recap coming up for you all right after this drop, as the Penguins are now 15-3-2 in their last 20 games against Columbus. Think about that going into this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to this Monday afternoon/evening episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. So, as I teased in the opening few seconds of this episode, Penguins got that 3-2 comeback victory over the Blue Jackets. That's the second time this season that the Penguins have come back after trailing going into the third period. I believe the only other time, on the road at least, the only other time, I believe, was the Vegas one where they were down 3-0. And then they roared back. We're down, I believe, 3-2 going into the third, and the Penguins just completely took that game over in that third period. But, we got to start, I think, with the obvious, and that's, the big goaltender interference situation. I clowned myself. For those that, follow me on social media, I thought at first it was no goal. I basically said, oh, there's no chance that, that this is going to stand. Saw the replay 5 seconds later. I'm glad that I got ratioed on that, because I just, I look to be an idiot. There was really nothing Sidney Crosby could do in that situation. And, it's funny that it took only 2 years to remind me how just awful that market is up in Columbus, because I do not think many people up there know a thing about this sport. I mean, you even have Blue Jackets media going out here saying, well, if this were Sidney, if this were Boone Jenner that this happened to, there's no way that the call would the call would stand, or something like that. And it's just the same old tired Crosby gets all the calls narrative that people have hung on to for the last 13 years. I thought people would forget about it during the pandemic. The Penguins haven't seen the Blue Jackets, hardly in the last 2 years, but I guess, they still remembered it, coming out of the pandemic. And it's just the same tired BS excuse that, it's garbage. Merzlikins literally initiated the contact, he's out of the blue paint, and you're telling me that it's Sid's fault? I don't see it. Sid he couldn't even do anything there. I mean, because Elvis was way out of his net. I mean, if he were, in his crease a little bit and then Sid ran into him, then it would have been goaltender interference. But because Elvis initiated the contact with Sid, that's why it was not goaltender interference. I know Columbus challenged it. I know Bob Airy said, oh, well, they should challenge. And then he said, oh, I don't understand why they challenged it. It's basically going to be a meme for the rest of time. That challenge basically lost them the game, because had they not challenged it, they would have been 5-on-5 for the last couple of minutes, and it would have been a 6-on-5 situation at the end instead of just a 5-on-5 thing, because of course the Penguins got a power play and they were able to just wipe the clock out overall there. So I'm happy with the call. I'm glad the NHL got it right. I'm not surprised that people up in Columbus don't understand the rules. They've been rooting for a team that literally has had no success for the entire time, that the Blue Jackets have been there. They've won one playoff series in 20 plus years. Their best player has basically been Rick Nash. And I know they've had Artemi Panarin come through, but he was never the captain. But, outside of him, it's Nash. It's just a total franchise. It's a franchise that I guess you kind of forget about. I thought it was also kind of embarrassing that the Penguins just took over that arena when the Blue Jackets are 9th place in the Eastern Conference right now. And, I know Washington's not playing well, but the Jackets in that month, I believe, went 8-3. I think they beat some pretty good teams along the way too. Washington, Florida. I know they lost to Carolina, I think once, but they beat a lot of pretty good heavyweights, and they're going to be a thorn in a lot of these playoff team sides, down the stretch here. So this is, I think, a team that's better than they get credit for, but it's still kind of embarrassing that, that your arena is basically 75 to 80% Penguins fans when you're kind of still in a playoff chase. Just doesn't really make any sense to me. But those two things aside, I thought the Penguins were the better team in this game. Getting to my, second biggest takeaway outside of those, they dominated in shot attempts. They dominated in scoring chances. They dominated in high danger scoring chances. And if I can actually just get up the underlying numbers here from Natural Stat Trick, it was not even close. At least in my opinion. The only reason why the Penguins were trailing going into the third, and for most of the third as well, was because of Elvis Merlikins. And, it looked like for the time being, hopefully my dog is not making any noise over there. It looked like for the time being that the Penguins were potentially going to get goal lead again. I know some people don't like to hear that term, but, Merzlikins was playing a really good game. He was making a lot of 10-bell saves. I think through 2 periods, the Penguins had 9 high danger chances. He had saved basically all 9 of them. The only puck that had gone in was just a floater from Chad Ruedel from the right side boards to get his second goal of the year. And I tweeted that at the time. It's funny that that's the puck that goes in and not, 10,000 high danger chances that they got before then. But, again, underlying numbers wise, the Penguins had 58% of the shot attempts, 55% of the scoring chances, 61% of the high danger chances, 55% of the expected goals. This was a very good performance by Pittsburgh, especially coming off a very emotional win against the New York Rangers on Saturday. What felt like a playoff game. We'll probably see that the Penguins will probably see that team 9-10 more times, as I discussed with John Chick of Locked On Rangers. But it was another win on Sunday that the Penguins needed. They had just snapped that 3 to 4 game losing streak. And, I know a lot of people weren't liking the way they were playing, and, some bad habits were creeping in and all this stuff. But, it was good that they got these 2 wins. So the team can shut those fans up, at least for a little bit. And, remember what I talked about last week, on one of my episodes. That losing streak is all going to be mute when the Penguins inevitably, start winning games again. And that's exactly what they did this weekend, because, there are a lot of encouraging signs, for this team. I know February was not that good of a month, but out of the 10 games, the Penguins went 6-3-1. I have the numbers right in front of me as I'm reading them to you all. In terms of shot attempts, the Penguins were 4th best in the NHL, 55% of the shot attempts at 5v5. For expected goals, they were 8th in the league at 54.9%. For 5-on-5 scoring chances they had 52.4% of those at 5v5 each game, 9th best in the league. And then for high danger scoring chance rate, they were 12th best in the NHL at 54%. This all comes courtesy of Adam Gretz's article from Pittsburgh. Please go check out his work. And I'm also hopefully going to have him on the podcast here sooner rather than later. They were also top 10 in expected goals against, I'm just making sure I have this right. Yeah. Expected goals against, scoring chances against, and high danger scoring chances against. The biggest reason why I think they lost some games or they didn't look as good in some other games that they won was because of their very low but unsustainable shooting percentage. The Penguins shot 4.5% for the month of February. That is the worst mark in the NHL during that stretch. Is that going to continue? No, it is not. It is going to rebound. Heck, even Danny Shirey of DK Pittsburgh Sports said the Penguins' top line shooting percentage was below 3% basically for this entire month. Yes, you heard me right. I mean, that's basically been the main reason why Jake Ensel is not scoring at a goal per game at this point. Brian Russ has gone a little cold at times as well, even though, he still had a point per game pace this year. So how cold can he really get, right? But these are numbers that are going to turn around, especially the top line shooting percentage and the overall team percentage as well. Like I said, it's really only a matter of time before that regresses to the mean, and that I think some of these people that are a little bit down on the team can be like, okay, maybe they're not as bad as we thought. But this all goes to my point in saying this team is really good. They're a Stanley Cup contender. They're maybe not up there with the top four, but the signs are there. The numbers are really good. The goaltending has been really good this year. Mostly Tristan Jarry, but Casey DeSmith had a really great game. I'm going to get to him later on this episode. But this team can do it. I really think that. And these 2 wins were badly needed going into a huge 5-game stretch where the Penguins are going to be even tested even more. And I'll talk about that later on this episode and later on this week as well when I preview some of those games. But coming up in the next segment, we're going to go into Casey DeSmith's play. We're going to also touch on the power play last night because that's just really heated up. Evgeni Malkin's goal and a whole lot more, of course, and especially Mark Friedman. I have to give my thoughts on him too. But before we do that, this is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right, thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you are missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy. They are marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar. They are a treat. And they are covered in 100% real chocolate. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, those are Puffs included. They're low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They are better than them as well. You can go to built.com, scroll down the macros chart. You will be blown away. Remember the best flavors: mint brownie, coconut almond, and new for this month for at least one more day, white chocolate cookies and cream. They are all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If you think a flavor might be good, they will make it. You can go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, welcome back to this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So getting into some players who I thought really stood out in that game against Columbus, Casey DeSmith. Just a really nice start from him. He was tracking the puck really nicely, side to side. His movement was great. I didn't like the second goal. I know I might be being a bit picky with that, but I think in that situation, he made himself a little too small. Roslovic doesn't really have the greatest angle. I know he's coming down the right side, I guess a bit, but in that situation, you got to come out and be a little bit bigger. He made himself smaller. And then, with Roslovic, he had more of the net to shoot at. And then he goes top cheese over, DeSmith's glove. In that situation, if a goalie just makes himself small like that, that's a shot that I feel like, a shooter will hit most of the time, to say the least. So I didn't like that. It's probably me being picky, but overall, he made some really big saves when the team needed him to. The other goal that he gave up, that was mainly Brian Jumlin's fault. I'm going to get to him a little later on in this show too. But, ever since, this game against Columbus, remember, this came about a month ago where he was pulled in favor of Tristan Jarry. That was when, all of us were saying, maybe the team has to go out and get a goalie, I especially was saying it. But in his last 5 games since then, DeSmith has had a 1.99 goals against average and a .934 save percentage. He was named the number 3 star against Columbus. He's been a completely different goaltender. And, I think that's why, a lot of fans and media, myself included, have now started the train of, I think maybe a top 6 winger should be, the Penguins' priority at the deadline. And maybe they don't have to go out and get a backup. Would it be nice? Sure. I would love it. I still probably don't trust DeSmith as much as some others maybe do right now. But, I can't deny that he has, played himself. Well, he's playing himself back into, getting his job back full time. I know he didn't technically lose it because they didn't, make a trade. I know Louis Domingue got hurt as well. But, Sullivan has given DeSmith the opportunity to win his trust back, and he has done just that. He's looked much better. It sounds like in practice, DeSmith talked about it last night to the media. He's been doing a lot of work with goaltending coach Andy Chiodo. Just a really nice start. And if he can continue to have starts like that, that's going to be huge down the stretch for getting rest for Tristan Jarry. Again, I've said it many times. He's been one of the most worked goalies this year. I believe he's second still behind Andrei Vasilevsky for the most starts in the NHL. That needs to change. He can't be gassed come playoff time. Again, if DeSmith can keep these numbers going, it's only going to help both him and Jari with about a little less than 30 games left. So great job from Casey DeSmith. I will take that kind of start every single time. Mark Friedman. I didn't really talk about him a lot with the Locked On crossover with John Chick of New York of the Locked On Rangers podcast, but he's been really stellar since coming in for Mike Matheson. Had basically 90% of the expected goal share, against the Rangers. Last night was also really good. If I can go down here and find the not the forward lines, the shift report. If I can find this here real quickly. Well, I probably don't even have to use that. Obviously saved the goal. Probably Casey DeSmith probably owes him about 10 steak dinners for that. And if the Blue Jackets score there, the game's over. The Penguins are probably not erasing that 2-goal deficit. I know they were playing well, but with how Elvis was going, I think the Penguins probably lose that game. But he's doing all of this on his offside, looks really solid defensively. What I've also noticed a lot from him, he's been jumping into the play a lot more than I remember him doing last year when Ron Hextall claimed him off waivers, from the Flyers. And, there's a couple, multiple times I saw against Columbus where, he was driving to the net, even coming, within, 5 to 10 feet, getting some of these high danger chances. And it's like, you don't usually see a lot of the defensemen step up like that. But, Friedman has, done it upon himself to do it. And, last night he was robbed of a sure goal by Gavrikov of Columbus. Friedman has the puck basically 5 feet from Elvis Merzlikins, and Gavrikov was able to get his stick in there right at the last second to send it out of play. If he doesn't do that, that is likely going top G's. So I've really liked how he's been jumping into the play more, being one of the more aggressive defensemen on that back end. And, he's not killing them defensively. At times his defensive play has, lacked, in some areas. But, these 2 games, I know it's a small sample size, but he's been pretty good. And again, this goes, for my opinion, that they don't need to go out and get a defenseman at the deadline. I've seen people say, go out and get John Klingberg, go out and get Jeff Petrie. And while those would be some upgrades, I'm not willing to pay that price. Go out and get the forward that they need, especially with Kasperi Kapanen continuing to struggle and a couple of other forwards that really have been producing. And then the team is fine. They don't need to go out and get a defenseman that has a lot of term and B, just a massive cap hit. And I know Klingberg, I guess, would kind of be a rental, because his contract is up after this year, but he's still pretty expensive. I don't think the Penguins have what the Stars would want anyway, but, the Penguins also have a lot of in-house options to replace a player like Mike Matheson, and Friedman has been playing a lot better than I thought he would. I was someone that I wanted POJ to come in because I want to see what he's made of and how he's been doing since he played in Wilkes-Barre this year. But with how Friedman played these last 2 games, I am willing to keep giving him the benefit of the doubt and keep giving him shifts because he's looked really well next to Chad Ruhwedel, and he's looking like a very fine number 7 defenseman, to say the least. Power play wise, it's ridiculous how good this unit has been since the new year. They're basically top 5 in power play percentage. Ever since Evgeni Malkin come back, I believe, they're close to number 2, number 3 in terms of efficiency. The puck movement on the one that tied the game was just sexy. I mean, all these amazing passes, Crosby to Russ to Gensel, right to Malkin, who taps it in. And I mean, it's just, Jay Foster, of Locked On Blue Jackets, it was damning me last night. He was basically telling me, how do the Penguins not score at will on this unit? Or, how do they not score at all at times? And I'm like, well, sometimes they're, over aggressive. The zone entries aren't there, but he makes a great point. When they have that much talent on the power play, it should be automatic. And last night, with how good it was looking, they were finally able to cash in. I should say, shout out to Mike Sullivan. What a timeout he called there. Happy birthday, by the way, 54 for Mike Sullivan. Called the timeout with, about a minute remaining on that power play. He knew how important it was because he knew the team was losing, but, he didn't want to send out his second unit because, chances are they probably wouldn't have scored. Wanted to give his top guys a rest. and, draw up a play, did exactly that. The Penguins were able to come back, get a nice zone entry, do those beautiful passes, look like the Harlem Globetrotters a little bit. And then Malkin's able to tie the game. And then that amazing picture, the overhead with all the Blue Jackets players looking down a little bit. And then Malkin's just raising his stick with Gensel as well. It's a really nice power play. And then, of course, Sid was able to end the game there with about 2 minutes left. So, again, the power play has just been such a, key component to the Penguins' success. It's really turned on as of late. It's pretty crazy that they're doing this without Todd Reardon behind the bench, though it sounds like he is still giving them instructional videos from home. At least that's according to Mike Sullivan and what I read from Josh Yohe in The Athletic. So great stuff there. I love seeing the power play really help win games. And, when they have passes like that and they're just making penalty killers look stupid, no, there's not much the opposition can do, to say the least. So coming up in my next segment, we're going to go into some of the players that struggled last night, namely Brian Dumoulin. He was just a mess, to say the least. But before I do that, football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance prompts to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, welcome back to this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins, excuse me. All right, I had to mute myself there to cough a little bit. Anyways, did forget to show, for those that are watching me on YouTube, I finally got my big Jeff Carter shirt from Steel City Shirts. If you have not ordered one, please do. It's very worth it. It's only around 25 to 30 bucks. Has that, scores goals, crush beer. Just it's a beautiful shirt. My Tristan Jarry one comes on Wednesday. I can't wait for that as well. So if you haven't ordered, one or both of those, I would definitely suggest that you do. Anyways, getting back to the episode topic for this segment, Brian Dumoulin, just an utter mess right now. And I really think it's mainly just his defensive work. That's the main issue. Both goals last night, I thought, were mainly the result of him, I shouldn't say being lazy, but just not making the right play in the defensive zone. The first one basically kind of does a half clear, but then is not taking away Bjorkstrand's, one-timer, and he's just late to get over there. And it's like, okay, if you're right there, you can just break that up, and that's not a goal. There's really nothing Casey DeSmith can do on that. The second one, very lazy clearing attempt to a side of the ice where there were 2 to 3 Blue Jacket players. And I was just like, really? That's the kind of clear we're doing here? You couldn't just, clear it up the middle or something, or the other side of the ice. Roslovich was able to pick that puck off and then go top cheese on DeSmith. And I know I said earlier that, DeSmith maybe could have had that, but it wouldn't have happened if Dumoulin would have just, actually had a good clear there. He has not been himself for the last 2 games now. This is kind of a level that we saw at the beginning of the season before he started to turn it around. If this doesn't pick back up for the rest of the season and going into next year, I'm probably not going to re-sign him. This is the kind of player, where he's at aging-wise now. He's right around 30 years old, has a lot of mileage on those tires, is bringing a lot of offense. This is not a player that you probably want to commit a lot of term and years to, just because, again, where he is age-wise and all that, doesn't bring a lot of offense. But, the Penguins, they do got to hope that he does turn this around, because we have seen the high level of play, excuse me, that he had earlier in the season, but for whatever reason, it's gone away from that. I don't know if he's battling an injury or doesn't have confidence or something like that, but it's not there right now for Dumoulin. And I got to hope that it comes back, but he was the direct result of those 2 goals that Columbus scored. And, that can't continue if the Penguins want to have Stanley Cup aspirations. He's usually a mainstay on Chris Letang's pairing. He cleans up for Letang's mistakes at times, but if he's making his own mistakes, there's only so much Tanger can do. So really hoping that he can get back. just his usual self. Kasperi Kapanen, I thought at times he had a couple of nice shifts. There were other times where it's like, well, just reverting, to the same old ways. It's just, this is what we have with Kapanen. I think at this point, I thought Sid was a monster on the ice, doing what he does best, tormenting the Blue Jackets and their fans. Jake Gensel had a couple really nice chances. Brian Rust, too. Just making sure I hit everything here before I call it an episode. I will say this: John Marino was actually not bad in that game against Columbus. I know he's had a pretty rough go of things as of late, but him with Pettersson, that was actually a pretty decent game from that pairing. They were an absolute nightmare last Thursday against the Devils. We're better on Saturday against the Rangers, where I think Pettersson was just taking Panarin his lunch. Every time Panarin was coming into the zone, Pettersson was just stripping the puck from him. And I thought Marino was looking pretty good too. And I thought that continued over into Sunday's game. Obviously it's not a lot to write home about, but, I'll still take it. Baby steps, as some people like to say. I also really like the chemistry with Danton Heinen and Evgeni Malkin. And speaking of Gino, outside of that power play goal, we're now up to 21 points in 19 games, almost to double-digit goals. For those that thought that he's going to mess up the structure or mess up the chemistry, as some other weirdos like to say, just get out of here with that kind of take. He's basically all the way back at this point. There have been multiple times these last two games where I've noticed at least that, he's been really galloping, and, he's taking the puck from, forwards or defensemen left and right, knifing through guys left and right too. There was one right after he scored the goal against New York. He knifed through, I want to say, 2 or 3 Rangers players. Shesterkin made a hell of a save after Malkin made the deke. But if Malkin scores that goal, I believe that came with about 7-8 minutes left in the third. Malkin scores that, the roof comes down from PPG Paints Arena. It would have just been so loud. Probably would have been one of the best Malkin goals we've ever seen. But this is vintage Gino, what we're watching right now. He's been one of the best players on the ice night in and night out lately. And I'm so happy that, the two-headed monster is fully back, and, they're full steam ahead right now, to say the least. But, that's a big win for the Penguins overall. 4 out of 4 points. Coming up, though, I said they have to run the gauntlet, and this is going to be that on steroids. Carolina, Florida, Vegas, Tampa Bay, and I think I forgot one team, of course, because I am a complete and utter idiot. Make sure here. Yeah. And Carolina again. So 2 times against Carolina, 1 against Florida, 1 against Tampa, 1 against Vegas. This week, the Penguins are off until Thursday. They'll get the Lightning down at MLA Arena. The Penguins and Lightning have split the first 2 games this year. And then they will play Carolina on Friday. Not really sure what's going to happen with that goaltending situation. I gotta think, my gut's telling me that DeSmith will start Thursday, Jari Friday, because Sullivan may do the, divisional game for Jari because the Penguins are trying to chase down Carolina for the division lead. But if it's the opposite, I would not be surprised, to say the least. But that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'll be back on Tuesday for another episode. I will say this month was just freaking awesome for the podcast. I have the numbers right up here, right around 17,000 downloads, a record for this podcast. It's, a few thousand more than last month. I can't thank everyone enough for continuing to listen to this podcast and just, come in here for all your Penguins coverage. I have the full number, 17,583, with how this is obviously the last day of February. It's probably going to be 18,000 by the time it's all said and done. Again, thank you all so much for listening to this podcast every single day, whether it's one episode or whether it's, 5 days a week all year. I very much appreciate it. And again, I will be back on Tuesday. We're going to start previewing the games for later on in the week, and I will talk to you all then.